Hi everyone, it's Candace Craw-Goldman again from quantumhealers.com. Do you love Dolores Cannon? So many people do. I count myself among the most blessed of Dolores' fans for two reasons. I not only got to have a session with her, I assisted her personally in her live classes for many years before her passing. So here at quantumhealers.com, we talk about all kinds of consciousness expansion and exploration things, not only past life regressions. And Dolores was not only a dear friend, but to this day remains my greatest influence and teacher. But before I continue, I will ask you to consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel. It would help a great number of those who wish to carry on with Dolores' work. So lots of people ask me about Dolores, and one question that often arises is about her training and credentials. Did she have a formal clinical hypnotherapy degree or a state-issued medical license? Well, the answer is no. Dolores did not earn a university clinical hypnotherapy degree, nor did she hold a state medical or psychology license. Her background was one of practical training, beginning in the late 1960s, followed by decades of practice, and then teaching her own method, quantum healing hypnosis technique, or QHHT. And here's Dolores's training and credentials timeline. Some of this surprised me. So the mid-late 1960s or so, she learns hypnosis. And she does this early habit control work with her husband. And she first encountered hypnosis in this informal way with her husband and through her husband, Johnny, who was the first one who was interested in this. And he was an amateur hypnotist. And she used simple hypnosis for things like smoking and weight loss, habit control, and nervous symptoms, that kind of thing. And in 1968 to 1969, the first past life regressions on a U.S. Navy base in Texas began occurring. And while stationed with Johnny on a Navy base, they worked with a base physician, and a patient under hypnosis unexpectedly reported past life memories. Dolores later called this the beginning of her life's work. In 1969 to 1970, there was this hiatus after Johnny's really terrible auto accident, and the family relocated to Arkansas. After Johnny's devastating car accident, which left him partially paralyzed, the family moved to the countryside in Arkansas, actually up on a mountain. And Dolores paused her hypnosis practice during these years to raise her children and care for Johnny. In the late 1970s to 1980s, she returns to client work and develops her regression approach. Dolores resumed hypnosis work and over thousands of sessions gradually developed her own unique regression methodology that became QHHT even after I studied with her in 2008 when I first started. She just called it back then Dolores Cannon's method of past life regression, and it was about 2011-ish that she changed it to QHHT. In the 1990s, after many rejections from the big publishing houses, Dolores just goes her own way because she could. And she publishes widely by establishing her own company, and she called it Ozark Mountain Publishing. Remember, she lived up on a mountain in 1992. In this way, Dolores began publishing her work to a wide audience, and then expanded her business that continues to distribute metaphysical and consciousness-related books by a variety of authors today, none of them quite as famous as Dolores Cannon. Now, 2002 begins her formally teaching her method of past life regression to students worldwide. Her classes started in person and expanded across the globe, bringing thousands of students to Arkansas and beyond. Interestingly enough, these first couple of classes Dolores made for clinical hypnotherapists only. But more on that later. And again, 2008, when I took my class with Dolores, and that's when I created her original Quantum Healing Support Forum website and directory listing. It wasn't called that. 2013, she launches the online Level 1 QHHT course. So this course was basically a video recording of an actual in-person course that was taught in Arkansas in 2012. I was there. And as in all of her live Arkansas courses after 2009, I traveled in from Kansas to provide direct assist. Actually, before then it was in Texas. But then after I moved to Kansas, I traveled in from here to provide direct teaching assistance to both the Level 1 and Level 2 class offerings. Now that class recording, that very same one, is the one and only. It's the only one ever recorded fully. And it was initially made available through the Udemy platform. Can you believe that? It's true. Back then, Udemy didn't do what they do now. So if you're aware of their marketing, they switched some things up. So that arrangement only lasted until the instruction would be made available exclusively through her own website. And of course, this made her training accessible to students around the world through recorded instruction. And 2014 was the sad year that Dolores transitioned. And just weeks after her last set of live classes, too, I remember standing at the top of that auditorium and looking over my left shoulder down at her. I hadn't hugged her goodbye, and she was so busy signing books, and there was a crowd of people around her, but I remember wistfully looking at her that day. But her heirs continued to certify practitioners, and of course, these certifications are proprietary to QHHT and are definitely not traditional university degrees or clinical hypnotherapy licenses of any kind. Okay, as we move along Dolores' journey, it's impossible to separate her professional path from the personal story unfolding alongside of it. To really understand how her work with QHHT developed, we need to pause just for a second and look at the life she built with her husband, Johnny, who's not that often mentioned. So Johnny's story is deeply intertwined with Dolores's. He served in the U.S. Navy, and it was during those years while stationed on a base in Texas in 1968 that he first brought Dolores into hypnosis. Johnny had been experimenting with simple techniques for habit control, and Dolores joined him. She actually told stories about carrying a suitcase-size recorder. Reel to reel, right? Together they began working with a base physician and one of his patients. And during a session, the woman just spontaneously and unexpectedly began describing past life memories. Johnny was right there in the room during that very first regression that set Dolores on the path she would follow for the rest of her life. But in 1972, that was the terrible year of the car accident. I heard Dolores talk about this accident numerous times. He was driving a VW bus, and a drunk driver hit him head on. He had to be cut out of the vehicle by emergency services, and by the time he got to the hospital, he lost most of the blood in his body. Dolores said that the doctors gave him a very small chance to survive. But Dolores had already been told by them, or the SC, or that all-knowing voice that appeared in her regression sessions, that the whole family, Johnny included, would be moving to and living in Arkansas. So she completely discounted what the doctors told her that night. And sure enough, he survived. But he was left permanently disabled, partially paralyzed, and forced into early retirement from the Navy. The family did move to the Arkansas countryside, and there Dolores could care for him and their 4 children. And for a little time, she stepped away from hypnosis. But as Johnny's health stabilized, Dolores eventually returned to her practice, and that's where her real journey with regression began to unfold. Johnny lived with disability for over 20 years until his passing in 1994. He recovered enough that, although still dependent on a wheelchair, actually built the house that he and Dolores lived in for many years. Imagine that. Dolores often said that while the accident was tragic, it changed the direction of their lives in a way that made her later work possible. Without that turn of fate, she may never have had the circumstances or focus to develop what we now know as QHHT. I myself did not see the house Johnny built until I returned to Arkansas for Dolores' memorial in the spring of 2015, just a few months after her passing. Standing there in the front yard, knowing that he had built it despite his paralysis, I could just feel the determination and devotion it must have taken. That home wasn't just 4 walls. It was a symbol of resilience. Family who faced hardship but created something lasting and beautiful together. So when we talk about Dolores Cannon's training and timeline, it's important to remember Johnny. He wasn't just her husband because, his story is part of the foundation of her story. The house he built despite his paralysis, it's kind of the perfect metaphor, creating something strong and enduring out of difficulty. And that spirit is woven into Dolores' work and legacy even today. As Dolores moved and transitioned into the teaching phase of her career, there was another surprising twist, this time connected to the question of training and prerequisites. So back then, when she first started beginning to offer these classes in the early 2000s, it wasn't even called QHHT, she required her students to already have the hypnotherapy certification or prior hypnosis training. She believed her method would be safer and easier for professionals who were already familiar with the whole concept of, deep brainwaves and hypnosis. But it didn't take long for her to notice something fascinating. Those trained in clinical hypnotherapy often had the hardest time learning her approach. Why? Well, they were used to what they were used to, right? Scripts, suggestions, and structured therapeutic models. And they had to unlearn a bunch of that to go in this new way. QHHT demanded something different. The ability to step aside and allow the client's own consciousness to speak without interference or, making these suggestions, right? Meanwhile, the students with no hypnosis background at all, people who came in simply open and curious, often excelled. They weren't carrying around years of preconceived methods. They could just follow Dolores' instructions and flow right into the process. And Dolores used to laugh about it in class too, saying, I thought I needed trained professionals, but they're the hardest to teach. And she would say that to the hypnotherapists in the classes that I was in and assisting. She would ask these questions, and she could tell very often who'd had the training by the questions they would ask and the comments that they would make. And she would say, well, you might have a harder time understanding this. Okay, it was in this realization that she dropped the prerequisites altogether. And from then on, QHHT became a method anyone could learn if they were sincere and dedicated. And that choice made all the difference. It opened the doors for thousands of practitioners around the world, many of whom might never have considered themselves qualified to even try if Dolores had kept her original requirements. So we see 2 important influences in Dolores' timeline. First, Johnny's accident and resilience, which reshaped the family's life and indirectly set the stage for her career. And second, Dolores' decision to throw open the doors of QHHT training, proving that this work was not meant to be locked away in academic circles or clinical licenses. Her story shows us that extraordinary wisdom can emerge in ordinary lives, although she just really didn't have an ordinary life at all. And that openness, rather than rigid qualifications, is what keeps a method alive and thriving. QuantumHealers.com was originally founded to support Dolores' students exclusively with QHHT. We created it together. But a couple of years after Dolores' death, we knew it was time for expansion. So although we opened our doors and our arms to alternative methods and now welcome all service to others practitioners and all quantum healers, we of course still warmly welcome any and all QHHT practitioners who can still and absolutely benefit from our open-minded community, directory, and teaching platform. We offer classes in Beyond Quantum Healing, Quantum Connect, more classes coming, opportunities to connect in live immersion classes, and we're developing just several other approaches too. Stay tuned. We provide a listing service for healers and a support forum community where you can ask questions and try out ideas. And that support forum contains all of Dolores Cannon's original support forum archives that date back to 2008. I'm really proud of that. And that December date when I first opened the doors to our forum, I think it was the 8th of December or the 9th. I don't know. It was this first Saturday in December, for sure. If you are a service to others practitioner or a quantum healer, maybe consider joining us. We are guru free. We're completely independent. I would love to have you join us. And remember to follow us and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks so much. See you next time.